For the past few months, my mind has been constantly thinking about Wish and its characters, anticipating the day it finally gets released on streaming to really discuss my grievances about it. And in that process, before and after the movie did come out to theaters, there was one major thing that concerned me and frankly the rest of everyone on the internet. Where obviously that pertained to the music of Wish, the most important element that celebrates the rich history of Disney storytelling with one of the most important factors that makes their movies so special. Where one could think having such a musical within the concept of wishes and how they play back into almost every Disney movie would make for a great experience that would truly last against the test of time, with what Disney represents, right? Well, unfortunately, such reactions became more negative as time rolled on when the soundtrack was released and just before the movie came out, and then after the movie came out, as disappointing as it truly was. It became something of a laughingstock, especially with something as predominant as a Disney movie, turning the heartbeat of what made that company the big empire it is today into a sick joke riding off the coattails of their very past, and the questions if AI was actually involved in it, in most of these terrible decisions of the output of the film, which honestly I do not actually believe for a moment, as such production was made well before such advancements were publicly shown. And it's just something that I constantly ponder over nowadays, listening to the soundtrack again and again, and comparing that to what made Disney songs actually work in the past better than what this did that frankly did not work. Because for me, I didn't think they were awful, like the worst thing in the entire world, and enjoy some of them occasionally on their own as songs, but I also don't find them to be good enough to be recognized as a Disney classic that we always love, the songs we constantly sing or jive no matter what age we are. I mean, to be honest, I'm not that very smart enough to really analyze the music itself like so many other great channels have done so brilliantly in the understanding of each song, but I still share a passion for the story and the art that they bring that most of us actually connect to regardless of the perspective of childlike wonder, just enamored with such sound and the memories we carry on as adults. The part being of consistency being key, where Wish is anything but consistent in that regard and carries no impactful weight to the decision of the very story, where one is portrayed this way and the other is portrayed that way, making it sound muddled and confused to the purpose of the very movie. Like when you hear one song and then you move to the next, it just sounds so different. Not that other movies don't also sound different, as each tells a unique part of the story that strengthens it as it goes along, but more in the way that I just mentioned, being inconsistent with how the characters are going along in the very movie, how they don't have enough time being developed or any information to go off to make the song a hit like it should to the audience. Instead, they are literally just pop songs included in a film that is supposed to be a musical, and that just doesn't work. Like, how do you actually mess up the important parts of the story in terms of the I Want songs of the hero and the illustrious villain song of, well, the villain? All signs that actually point to the muddiness of the production and what the executives probably wanted out of this that never gave anyone any time to actually breathe, since I don't really fault the songwriters for how it ultimately came out, as it was a combined effort of everyone who worked on the film to bring it to life. Because going back to that point is where we have to discuss the choices of Julia Michaels as the predominant songwriter of the film. Most of us know her work in terms of pop songs that we usually hear from the many pop artists, including herself in that regard, where she began her journey with Disney by making a pop song version of the song that Vanellope sings in Ralph Breaks the Internet, which was absolutely horrendous regardless, except for the version that Julia did sing at the end credits, which I enjoy occasionally, simply having a good time listening to it like if I were casually bowling or going out somewhere. Which makes sense for what she was involved with Wish, as the time Ralph Breaks the Internet came out in 2018, where the development of Wish began that very same year. I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean that they were going to choose her from that point, as that was just the beginning of the idea for the film itself, when they were also going to make it 2D, which bugs me so significantly, where they were thinking of the most important element that comes to Disney with wishes. Which, thinking about it now and what I've learned with what each song entails specifically regarding what was done, was exactly for that pop nature, to make them hits instead of actual pieces of musical theater, which is what made Disney stories to what they are today, to the hits that they were to begin with. It's important to speak about this because usually such songwriters were involved with the overall story process compared to what we just discussed made something about Wish, with Julia explaining that she was giving something so short or vague to work with, in terms of that pop nature that they were going for. because when we think in terms of films like in the past like Encanto, Lin-Manuel Miranda was presented an idea by John Lasseter to work with Disney animator and director Byron Howard for a new musical, working towards the start of the very film with what they wanted the story, which would actually influence to how the music and the movie would play out, where of course before that he was working with Moana years before it was even announced, and even before Hamilton took off in what we know it today, involved in the process of what should be done regarding the purpose of the movie that should tell, similar to that of the older Disney era when Howard Ashman was involved, who really did bring the musical theater back to life in Disney storytelling to what it is today. This was the time where he became involved with Disney after he was asked to write a song for Oliver and Company, with another film like The Little Mermaid helping to develop the story, making it a Broadway-style musical, with the songs serving as the tentpoles of the very film. Where it is also a known fact that Howard Ashman is listed as a producer alongside co-director John Musker of the very film, making it stand out to the fact that he was really involved to how the movie was going to turn out the way it did, especially the fact that you could see him directing Jodie Benson and how the songs like Part of Your World turned out the way it did. The purpose of acting, singing combined together, making it the best type it was and influencing a new generation of I Want songs that Disney is known for. And some can be said for the other writers like Tim Rice or Stephen Schwartz, who also did have backgrounds in musical theater, making songs that resonate with the audience and the story of the characters themselves so that we understand them. Where it is that understanding that helps us learn what is so special about these very individuals and why you have both kids and adults sing along here at home or in their theme parks. It is the importance of the film that plays a factor into the story and the music itself. But recently again, such understanding has been removed by even the great teams themselves I just mentioned in Disney's own 100th anniversary, especially beginning with Alan Menken and Lin-Manuel Miranda coming back for the Little Mermaid remake that misunderstands what was put in originally, especially by those who already knew what to make in the story and was even involved in that story with what had already been done. This was done by adding unimportant songs that add nothing except for the fact to stay fresh into the public's light, like adding songs like Scuttlebutt, which was highly annoying but added a style that you are familiar with a certain person who Disney loved working with in terms of how Moana and Encanto were just generally the more successful critical films of modern times, where the plan was just to put emphasis on the easier digestible pop songs like how Let It Go and We Don't Talk About Bruno took off to the popularity it did, and why they probably went very vague with everything else, including Julia Michaels into the fray of Wish. This is where we have to apply the demo versions as well to what was being said. I mean, most of it is like the final product, but has context to what the story was probably going to be like, or in what was shown or wasn't shown. And like I said, I ain't no expert in music, but only in my own feelings to how I connect to it. The feelings that we resonate with each individual song that makes us happy, sad, or feel whatever. And this is where we finally begin with our first song with Welcome to Rosas, serving as the intro to The Kingdom and of course the movie itself, where we notice something familiar with its upbeat nature that matches that of the family madrigal in Encanto, serving more as the poor man's version of that very song the more you think about it. This was a sign that showed Disney's own hand that wanted to match what they had with Encanto without understanding why it actually hit off to begin with. It shows something that the entire soundtrack wants to do in terms of rhyming to flow and add some sort of weight to the story, but not really doing it in such a very good way, like without that story part I just mentioned, where the second verse has Asha have these weird rhymes with glow with powerful or 18 with ceremony, which simply just does feel weird. Then again, I cannot really explain it well enough to actually describe my feelings, where it just feels too upbeat to show what we should know about Rosas, since the beginning was relatively short and just a simple small explanation of what it's touching and showing us Asha without any relative information about her very beginning, throwing us into something we still know little about in terms of everyone who seems happy living in this very kingdom when all their wishes can come true. To me, I just don't know what this song is about other than the fact it's a good song to jam to, where I just learned nothing else about the kingdom that is important. It's too open and too vague to really understand compared to the family madrigal, which really dives more into the deep introduction of each character a part of the family, and also reminding you that Mirabel is a part of it, but doesn't actually show like the others do. It really adds important, relevant information to our hero and the world itself that should be affected from the beginning and end of the movie, as we know in the story of Encanto, where this song in Welcome to Rosas just goes throughout what can be done simply on the surface without any meaningful connection to our hero other than my 100-year-old grandfather who will probably get his wish today. It's not really telling us much like what wishes has been specifically granted and why I don't think this works quite well, because it just wants to be basic and bare bones as you could be. And thinking about that, why shouldn't we delve into the overall reasons that people love Rosas and why Asha wants to become the king's apprentice in the scene, as that happens after the song is done? Anything that relates again to where she is now, what we normally see in most Disney stories where our heroes begin as kids mostly, just thrusting her up to this very moment when she's already 17 into the fray without learning much about her other than her bubbly attitude and the song Welcome to Rosas and Your Wishes Come True. It's something to really mention again because her background is sort of given to us again a little bit before we dive into our next song that starts with Magnifico to really separate these two main characters and why they are the way that they are. It's where you have to mention the fact of her father in the story, which I've already criticized before, being so small and only name dropped at this moment in time compared to, you know, where it would have been important with something before Welcome to Rosas in the beginning of the movie. Just some clues that actually made it strong, which failed to begin with. Where this is where we have to talk about our second song with At All Costs, and what I mentioned earlier with the demo versions of the song, where most people point out that Star and Asha were supposedly to sing a love duet in the earlier versions when he was a star boy, where the lyrics itself actually pertain to that when it originally said love you as one does instead of promise in the final version, where such a song just naturally does feel like a radio top 100 hits that sound like a romantical duet that generally does not apply to a villain and a hero. I mean, sure, it's an interesting dynamic to have both of them sing in what we know later with the characters on and what they dedicate their lives to protecting and making sure that all wishes be granted, or just being selfish and granting those that are good for their own kingdom. All things on paper that sounds good, but on execution just generally lacks any weight with what we learn later on, especially in the tone of the story. Like, you start from a high note on the last song, but this song just goes soft into the next, where it just doesn't really feel quite right in this very moment. It's why I complained about the fact that Love is an Open Door is also a villain song in that very way, because it just doesn't fit to what is being said about the characters that were already shaped one way and how that is similar to this, when it feels like it belongs to something else despite being very interesting to what a hero and villain could apply. Duets between hero and villains are so interesting, and I guess that's what they wanted to go for. But the more you hear that demo version repeating love instead of promise in the final version and what was actually being emphasized, it just really doesn't work the way it was intended. Learning about those two in a certain way that doesn't match their personal development in the entire film. It just makes you really think about the original intention more and more, because it felt like it was designed that way, where in terms of most Disney songs, you already know what that's pertaining to and what is happening because of how it tied back into the story. It's actually mentioned in the song itself to what they want, and it makes sense. But sadly, not this one, because it sounds too romantic in its tone. Like, you can hear it and it feels like these two individuals love each other or something like that. Like, you can look in the first verse at what he sings and you can see how that applies to someone special in that regard, in what two people can discover in their own romantic love, emphasizing the word you so often in the song. And that just doesn't make sense when the next scene is the ultimate revelation that not all wishes are granted, and he actually keeps the memories of those he doesn't want for his understandable reasons that aren't very fleshed out, the point of trying to twist to make him the villain of the plot and justify him as that very character. Where you also kind of get that sense within the same love song context that this song just wasn't necessary in this part and what could have been shown for her in the state that was already told. You can easily remove this sequence because it's not necessary, because she wanted her to see her grandfather's wish be granted and all of that, and you didn't need this kind of song because it didn't match the tone of what was being shown, and not anything important like a revelation that the star is the one who can probably give these wishes in the first place compared to how Magnifico steals them. Like, again, there's just not enough revealed to make any grand impact other than the desires of Asha, who wants to grant everyone's wishes without any repercussion or what they could have bring, where everyone was just relatively happy at the beginning, including her with what she subscribed to. All because her grandfather won't have his simple wish granted. Which of course doesn't carry any weight either, because there isn't much to go off on in order for them to get to the next part as quickly as possible. Enough to the main focal point of the entire movie being, of course, this wish. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to do it in a larger review of the movie when it comes out as a whole, to show the problem of what it represents, just like the rest of the film, where songs like this really just have nothing. Meaning, it just has no meaning to it in what the movie should be and the I want desire of the main character. Because the selling point of the song is the fact it's supposed to be the highlight of what the film represents in terms of wishes and wishing for your desires to come true. And of course, also being promoted heavily by Disney themselves to be a hit it should be, just like Let It Go and Bruno to top the charts and the popularity of said film. Where I don't particularly think that this is bad, but I just don't think it explains itself very well within the context of who Asha is or what drives her, like she says in the song. Because when you look at it on the surface, you can jive with it pretty easily, as they have truly shoved it everywhere in every single promotional material, where it really doesn't do anything harmful, being an annoying piece that you don't want to listen to, where it's just generally enjoyable to the ear, and just works like the rest as a song, as a typical piece you hear without any story and something that people just generally love. And that's a point I've already shown before using the footage I got back at Disneyland at DCA when they were promoting the movie during the holiday season at World of Color, where in this clip that I did shoot and showed in other videos, people in the crowd were actually singing the song and jiving and having a good time, including myself because of how many times I actually listened to it, where I just torture myself to listen to the entire soundtrack again and again, where it generally does have some good beat and good vibe to it that people can enjoy, and I don't fault them for that. But again, regarding the rules of these movies, it just really has nothing to add on its own and the specific meaning like past Disney heroes would usually say, where you would know what actually motivates them and drives them. Like, you can really see that in the first chorus of the song where she says, "I make this wish to have something more than this," where you don't really know what the hell this is. What do you mean by this? What vague definition are you supposedly applying this to? Because we know you discovered that everyone doesn't get their own wish granted, but you never really decided to talk about that all in this song, unlike the other songs that we've seen before, which again is all done for that simple reason of just making it pop, like a pop song that you could just simply sing along. Like I said earlier, everyone at Disneyland was sort of doing or enamored with, except for my friend who was aware of the fact that all of this that I've mentioned in Wish isn't good at all, and questioning why the hell am I even singing along too. But of course, it's not only the chorus that does this itself, but it's also seen in the first verse too when she says, "Oh, this is where we've been, but it's not where we belong. I may be young, but I know I'm not wrong." Not wrong about what exactly? That Magnifico chooses to keep these wishes? Because I wouldn't know you were talking about that if I just heard this by itself, compared to, you know, the others I've just said in the I Want songs where the lyrics do pertain to what the character was already shaped by in the story. Thinking in terms of like when Moana was talking about the sea that calls her and the complacent attitude on everyone on this island that's hammered again and again, Mirabel discussing what she can't do compared to her family, Anna expressing everything is open again in the first time since forever, Belle wanting more than this provincial life, Quasi wanting to spend one day with the public out there, Ariel wanted to be a part of our world, and Hercules just wanting to go the distance. Because like others have said on here, everything that Asha wants is just too vague to understand in the context of the movie is trying to present, where wishes play a big part of that in what she had learned. Deciding to focus on the catchy rhymes because it just wants to sell you on something that they had from before. Which, to be fair, the lyrics are something that says otherwise and are just so crudely put together in that regard, putting things that really don't make any sense, like throwing caution to every warning sign, because that instead just reminds you of what the warning sign is supposed to do, being careful, especially including caution to be extra careful in that regard, instead of doing the opposite of what the phrase actually means by throwing it to the wind to do something more dangerous that might result in failure if that happens. You know, the type of thinking that Walt Disney did back in the company's early days, where every big project he did like Snow White and Disneyland could have resulted in destroying the very studio, compared to, you know, everything that modern Disney does, just doing safe, wanting to remake everything. Which, actually thinking about it now, in terms of that sense, it actually kind of makes sense in terms of Disney's overall thinking, to be honest, which is what this and every other song Wish has is supposed to go for. The other major factor is something I mentioned about Asha being a bad character from before, in how her father is actually mentioned briefly and never actually expanded on again in that very scene. Like he's shown there with young Asha and then never again. Like the lyric shows you that sort of understanding to what she says if you saw the movie, but then again leaves it too vague to understand enough information because no information was really given to develop that point, where it would have actually made it a stronger song if that was fleshed out, both in terms of lyrics and storytelling. But that wasn't the intention, wasn't it, Disney? Anyways, I'll talk more about this when I get the movie eventually to get more details about the entire film as a whole. where this instead leads us to our new revelation of Star coming down to help after she makes this wish, to play into the aspect that shows its own origin as they've advertised, which is where the next song, being I'm a Star, comes into play that gives us that very answer. But as expected, that very answer is again too vague to even understand, because this is supposed to be the moment where Asha understands that this is the wishing star who answered her wish for some reason, where it shows and gives the power speech to the animals in order to explain that for her, or so it seems, where when it starts and gets into the chorus, it just asks the question that pertains to you specifically instead of the star, like where do you come from, being made of stardust that connects us all to such magic, but including the fact of what they advertised for the movie and what was being said just before the song started by question by Asha, it just carries no weight whatsoever to what is being done in the film, other than having something that you will learn eventually towards the end of the climactic battle. Like, the only point this song was actually included was to put in more the whimsical value that most Disney animals have in their own films, the stereotypical image of all the animals singing in the forest from the early days of the charm of Bambi and Snow White in that element of the magic. Just like this wish, it only includes the basic principle and nothing more. Nothing to bring a better meaning or understanding of the story at hand or the broader view of how films like Pinocchio have people wish upon a star and actually coming true. Because what the hell is this star exactly other than a cute marketable plushie? What is his reason or existence as a character in the film? Because the fact that everyone is made out of stardust just really does not solve any problem that the story presents, putting into play to how Magnifico keeps these wishes and why such wishes exist in the first place. And it doesn't even help when their lines actually allude to Star explaining all this through them, like the part where this one says, "If I'm explaining this poorly, then I'll let Star do it for me," when Star actually doesn't speak at all in the entire course of the film. The charm of the cute Luna creature is just too much to handle for it to talk at all, where it has to rely on the singing animals to explain that, just like a Disney parody for some reason. It just turns this into a pointless kid song, if you get what I mean, where it doesn't necessarily add value to the story like it really should, where, you know, if you had a star with a maybe human body or a connection, maybe something like this could have had meaning, or a love duet, you know, that kind of thing. But no, the music doesn't want to be that, throwing us into the heist portion of the film to get the wishes back with a paranoid Magnifico singing what we all know now as the worst Disney villain song ever in This Is the Thanks I Get. And I don't think I really need to explain this any more than what has been said multiple times, including by myself, because honestly, this isn't a villain song at all, by how poorly written he was just to begin with, to justify a character that fits the mold of what a Disney villain should be without actually making a villain to begin with. Again, before this point, everything was at least understandable to some degree to what he was trying to protect in his own way, but never really given more than what the surface brings you, and then switch to a selfish narcissistic brat who sings a pop song about how good he is with his redundant lines. Because that is what this song is. Again, like the rest, a pop song rather than a villain song that never gives any meaning to what the character is about, vaguely turning into wicked evil just because of a book that nobody should touch just because. Like, they never explain that part well either. Where if you understand what villains are all about, then you can see that nothing they say hits with its anachronistic lyrics that fits to what a modern teen would say and not a king from a couple hundred years ago. Or more frankly, an old out-of-touch executive who thinks that's the lingo of what teens say today, where everything about it actually should work on the surface down from the title to the content of the song, which is a nice different pace from the normal villain songs, but instead just comes off in the wrong way with the repetition of This Is the Thanks I Get, with the background singers you hear in the song just feel like belonging in a typical Disney pop song they put on their parades or their TV shows like Disney Channel. It just spells very easy or digestible to younger audiences, since that is what the whole appeal of what the brand really is today, never wanting to challenge or even question what animated films could bring in terms of Disney in that regard in the form of art. It is only meant to serve as a short answer to a frustrating question most fans of Disney have had in regards to where did the villains actually go, or why didn't they actually do one in a decade at this very point in time. Where you really can't do that no matter what you think in terms of celebrating the past, present, future of Disney animation, where you need proper time to actually develop this, where this seems like the cheapest basic way to even do so. Which is also sad to think about within the context of what Magnifico was trying to initially protect after what we vaguely learned to what happened to his own family and his original land. Like that is an understandable story that justifies his character later on, but they never went that route, and they did this 180 that focuses about him and only him without any justification for that part of the story. And again, speaking of what it mainly justifies, it also contributes to the hollow feeling of the next song despite being one of my initial favorites in Knowing What I Know Now. Because this is a song that is developed out of the fact that Magnifico reveals his true colors as an evil to, of course, Asha, her family, and her friends at a very rapid pace. Because if you've seen the film, then you know what happens in the scene where most of them get called out as traitors just like that for just helping Asha, who he figured out so quickly, causing them to all hide from the guards. In that regard, this song just really doesn't hit like it should, despite feeling very powerful to me. Like, I enjoy this to some degree, but it also feels weird within the tone that should match the villain songs, where they switch both of them up to feel a bit different, like, you know, having a good element and a bad element. I mean, I like that very element, and I guess that's why I enjoyed this a little bit more, but then again, both really don't hold weight to the characters' decisions, especially in terms of a group of characters who aren't well designed other than being a reference to the Seven Dwarfs. Like, each do have a personality to them, but that personality isn't developed beyond that very point, where they are now thrusted into this situation with our main character taking the lead, showcasing how evil their king had become, where at least it actually knows what it wants and has more meaning to the lyrics compared to the previous songs we just mentioned, but still barely has much provided to go off with how unimportant the rest of these characters are, except again for Asha. Like, one of them was portrayed as skeptical at one point even at the beginning of the song, but then gladly joins into the song, willing to fight after the others come in, expressing the same fight against Magnifico, where that hardly makes any sense at all, because it contradicts something that was supposed to be there, but also wasn't, because they never thought on exploring that. Oh, yeah, and of course, it's also made worse by the fact that they had to make Queen Amaya very sympathetic for some reason, where she herself also joins into the song. This holds nothing because she knows more about her husband than any of us at this point, where it decides to shift at this moment to give her a purpose in the very story for her character as much as the Seven Dorks in the film. One that we all know was supposed to be a villain too alongside her own husband, but they never actually went with that. Something I really want to dive in more within the context of the story, but just keeping it short within the music itself. It really doesn't work because there was nothing to say in the first place that made you actually jive with it, especially with Queen Amaya not really being an impactful character other than supporting wife to a husband who rules a kingdom, where it just now suffers more from its character problem rather than a lyrical problem like the last songs had. I mean, there is probably some on its own, but I really can't say for my own taste, and I can only say what I feel about each character that isn't well developed to this point. Because when you think of that, you think in terms of every Disney song that matches what is being said about its world, its characters that you understand, even including the minor ones in like Moana, and you hear them singing, especially with her father, telling her that we're safe and secure on this island, that where you are is safe and sound, everyone knows their role. But here, we don't have much of that role in place of those characters. And unfortunately, this makes things worse because it leads us to the last and arguably most terrible song of them all, being This Wish's Reprise. And you're probably wondering right now why I would actually say that when I think that This Wish isn't a bad song at all, and virtually is almost the same song in that regard with its lyrics. Well, I say this because of the fact of what is taking place at this moment in time being the final climactic battle between the villain and his entire kingdom. And again, the information of I'm a Star actually involved, where everyone somehow just now sings the song that Asha sung earlier, where their stars come out one by one as they keep singing the lyrics, which somehow lessens the power that Magnifico has. Now, granted, I know some people might have heard her singing earlier in the film, but it just doesn't make sense to how it plays out. That feels more like a borderline parody at this point other than an actual impactful statement. They're just singing a song and the villain is losing his power for some reason. If you like it, that's fine, but please note that this is the worst way for a song to be played in and performed in anyway, because the villain's battle is right there, and this is the very song to how he's even defeated. Where if you think about it, no real Disney movie except for this very one actually uses the power of song to trap him there for good, because these are usually very intense moments for our characters that causes the death of said villains most of the time, instead of a simple defeat where a song usually doesn't even play in that part, where it just doesn't make sense to do so. Like, it just feels like somebody wrote a parody of what it should be expected, especially within Disney songs, right? But then again, I guess in terms of what this story was going for in that grand celebration, they just wanted to do that to really emphasize the Disney 100 history. But also just cannot believe that this was the final song, because it just makes no sense whatsoever to how this could have happened at all, just like that, combining both no character development for every single person in the scene and our main hero and the villain all together as one. It just feels cobbled up together to make something actually work that happened so fast with so little time to add right now, just trying to justify itself to end the entire story, where they had to put words into the mouths of the townspeople where somehow that made sense. Like, no, it doesn't. It sucks. It's stupid. You can't write a song just like that. It doesn't make sense to do so. And fortunately, that's basically it as far as the songs go, other than Julia Michaels' own song being A Wish Worth Making, which is also fine on its own in order to celebrate Disney for the past century, which is very cute, and I love all those visuals looking back upon the characters of Disney's past in the credits and the music video playing that montage of why we like that. But then again, after that, that is all that there is to it with Wish's songs. We're thinking about it as a whole in the context of the movie, it just failed to impress because it never actually delivered any weight to any decision that was being made, failing in the audience's eyes because they could see and hear something wrong that doesn't match what should be shown. Or that was the fault of how it was never given any greater meaning or purpose for the songwriters to really imprint their focus on the story in order to fulfill a basic need that spelled Disney entertainment. We're looking back on every video that has been released on Wish, including my own, is to hope to be better, as many people hold these stories and music dear to their hearts, the rich history to what they brought, and the pioneering that so many others do use today. It is this hope that people rise up to the next challenge to make something better in their own way, whether it be to change their storytelling or make something new with the diversity of other studios and themselves in their own talent, that they can either run from it or maybe learn for it, as many of us would actually like, to remember what guides us to the heart and make brilliant stories from beginning to end, and the music that makes that spice. So I make this wish to have something more than this in terms of movies and music. And I guess I'm all done now, so goodbye.